Okay, part 2. Where were all his spots? All Dalmatians had spots. He wasn't even black and white. He was ginger. And then Poppy noticed something else. This George wasn't even a dog. He was. Susie smiled. He's a kitten. Poppy knew about kittens from Animal Rescue. Kittens couldn't be pirates. They weren't nearly fierce or brave enough. What were her family thinking? Poppy stared at the ball of ginger fluff in Susie's arms. It had huge eyes and little whiskers all around its mouth. And at the end of its tiny paws, reaching towards Poppy's nose, it had, ouch, claws, and they hurt. Susie put George on the ground. Poppy and George stared at each other. Then Poppy edged closer and leaned down to sniff him. George reached a paw up and smacked Poppy right in the eye. So much for a new shipmate. Poppy stomped over to her bed and didn't make any space for George. When Poppy woke up the next morning, there was no one in sight. Usually Tim or Susie came for cuddles first thing, but not this morning. Everyone was in Mum and Dad's room sitting on the bed. They were all saying things like, "Oh, he's so cute. Oh, look at his little paws." In the middle of the bed, right where Poppy was never allowed to sit, was a ball of ginger fluff. George. Poppy put her head on the bed. "Oh, Poppy, I didn't see you there. Forgot all about you." "We were busy playing with your new brother," Dad said laughingly, and the others laughed with him. Poppy did not get the joke. "He's not my brother," she thought crossly, "and he's definitely not my shipmate." "Are you sure Poppy and George will be okay together?" Tim asked as they left for school. "They'll be fine," Mum replied. "Come on, we're going to be late." Poppy lay on her bed, more miserable than ever. She could hear slurping sounds coming from the kitchen. She went to investigate. George was having a drink out of Poppy's water bowl. Poppy growled. "Rrr." George looked up. He wiped his whiskers with one of his tiny fluffy paws and skipped away. Poppy followed him to the lounge. He'd curled up on the sofa. Poppy refused to look at him and headed to her bed in the corner. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but she was too cross. Then she heard a shuffling sound. Poppy looked at the sofa. George was gone. But the pirate treasure she'd hidden with Tim, her sock was on the sofa and it was moving. Poppy picked up the sock in her teeth. It was heavier than she remembered. "Meow!" Poppy dropped the sock. Something was inside it. Something small and fluffy and ginger. Poppy picked up the sock again and shook it. The tip of a ginger tail poked out. A ginger bottom and 2 ginger paws came next. One more shake and George plopped onto the floor. Poppy let out a fierce growl. "Rrr, rrr." Well, as fierce as she could manage with a sock between her teeth. She marched across the room, dropped the sock on her bed and sat on it. From now on, she would guard it with her life. At least George would never find her other pirate treasures. They were too well hidden. Something was squeaking. It was coming from Tim's bedroom. Poppy went to see what it was. Tim's wardrobe door was open. Inside, On top of Tim's PE kit was George. He was jumping up and down on the squeaky ball. Poppy's second piece of pirate treasure. Poppy barked loudly. Woof, woof, woof. George froze, paws in the air, ears sticking up. He looked at Poppy with his big round eyes. Poppy growled. She nosed George out of the way and took her ball to bed. She would watch her treasure like a hawk from now on. She was just going to rest her eyes for a moment. Protecting pirate treasure is hard work for anyone. Chapter 5. Ah! Something was pulling Poppy's tail. George! That was it. Poppy had had enough. But before she could think of anything else, George leapt forward and pounced on her tail. Poppy growled her most fearsome, angry pirate growl. Arrgh! George arched his back and let out a hiss that sounded like a snake. Poppy stared at him for a moment in surprise and then remembered how cross she was. Barking, she chased George out of the room, across the hall and into the kitchen. Ruff, 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 ruff. George jumped up and landed on the door handle. The back door swung open. Poppy barked again. George slipped off the handle, fell to the ground and ran out into the garden. Finally, thought Poppy, I've got the house to myself again. Chapter 6. It was quiet, too quiet. Where was George? Making trouble somewhere, probably. Poppy went outside and sniffed the bushes. Not there. She tried the flower beds. Nothing there either. Then she heard a noise around the back of the shed. No! Poppy darted to her hiding place and there was George, sitting on the wall, nibbling on her lamb bone. Poppy jumped at the kitten, but George bounded off the wall and away through the flowers. Poppy chased him all around the garden. She was going to teach that kitten a lesson once and for all. Before Poppy could catch him, George dashed across the grass, leapt high into the air and landed on a lily pad in the middle of the pond. Poppy reached the edge of the pond and skidded to a stop. George was scrabbling around on the lily pad. He was slipping and he would soon end up in the water. Good, thought Poppy. That'll teach him to mess with Poppy the pirate dog. But even though she was a tough pirate dog, she couldn't help feeling sorry for him. She couldn't leave him. She was supposed to look after him. After all, he was her brother. Meow, meow, mewed George as a corner of the lily pad slipped under the water. Poppy looked at the wooden decking that led almost to the centre of the pond. There's nothing else for it, she thought. I'll have to walk the plank. Poppy tiptoed carefully all the way to the end of the deck and stretched as far as she could, but George was just out of reach. George leaned towards Poppy. The lily pad he was standing on sank even more, and George nearly sank with it. No, thought Poppy. She thought she wouldn't make it, but then Poppy reached a bit further, grabbed at George's neck in her teeth and pulled him to safety. Chapter 7. Poppy carried George along the plank into the garden and put him down on the grass. Come on, little brother, she thought, let's get you inside. Poppy picked up the lamb bone and they went to the house. Poppy took the bone to her bed. She curled up next to it. George sat on the floor. Meow, he said. Poppy looked at him and then she sighed and moved her treasure to make a bit of space. Come on then, she thought, hop aboard. Susie and Tim burst through the doors when they got home from school. "George!" Susie called. "Poppy!" Tim shouted. They ran into the lounge. Two warm bodies were snuggled cosily together, surrounded by a collection of pirate treasure. "Mum, look!" Susie called. Mum came into the room. "See, I told you. I told you Poppy would be fine with the kitten." "He's not a kitten," Poppy thought, pulling George a little bit closer and snuggling up a little tighter. "He's my new shipmate." The end. There you go. We hope you enjoyed that story and how lovely they became friends at the end. Rusty's got two little one brother, one sister. Got Charlie and Laura. And they all get on absolutely fine. They often cuddle up together for a sleep. So it just shows everyone can get on, no matter who you are. Anyway, have a really good week. Rusty and I will be back next week for another story. Take care. Bye-bye.